The morning sun crept over the rooftops of Maplewood, a quiet small town in the American Midwest. The streets were already beginning to stir, a delivery truck rumbled past, a few joggers ran along the sidewalks, and a dog barked somewhere in a nearby yard. Maplewood was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's name, or at least pretended to. Today, like every day, the heart of this town beat strongest in its little diner on Main Street, Sonny's Cafe. Inside, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with sizzling bacon and toast. The bell above the door jingled as a handful of regulars settled into their usual seats. Among them was Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who had been coming here for years. With a gentle smile and a slightly stooped posture, he quietly read his newspaper, occasionally nodding to other patrons. He wore a worn jacket and a simple hat, a quiet reminder of the modest life he lived. Behind the counter, Emma, the diner's main waitress, moved gracefully from table to table. She was in her late 20s, with soft brown hair tied in a practical ponytail and kind eyes that seemed to notice everything. Emma wasn't rich, but she was proud, working tirelessly to support herself and her younger brother, who was still in college. Her shift had started an hour ago, yet she greeted every customer like they were old friends, even if they were only passing through town for the day. The contrast between Emma and some of the more affluent customers who occasionally stopped in was stark. There was Mr. Reynolds, a businessman in a tailored suit, tapping impatiently on his phone while barely acknowledging the waitress. He was courteous when forced, but distant, wrapped in a world where wealth often substituted for kindness. Emma noticed him but chose to focus on her tasks, the kind of patience that only comes from years of juggling responsibilities and maintaining a sunny demeanor despite exhaustion. As she poured coffee for the first table of the day, Emma's mind wandered briefly. She thought about the bills waiting at home, her brother's tuition, and the grocery list that needed ticking off. But then her eyes landed on Mr. Thompson, quietly fumbling with his wallet. A small, uneasy feeling stirred in her chest, though she didn't know why yet. There was something about the way he lingered over his breakfast, the way he seemed to shrink into his chair, that tugged at her empathy. Outside, the town itself was waking up. Children with backpacks trundled past on their way to school, their chatter filling the crisp morning air. A couple walked hand in hand down the sidewalk, smiling at the familiar faces of shopkeepers who waved in return. This small-town rhythm was comforting, almost predictable, but it also highlighted the contrasts of life. Some people walked with a spring in their step, their lives filled with opportunity and hope, while others, like Mr. Thompson, moved quietly, weighed down by loneliness and modest means. Emma adjusted the napkins on one table and then glanced at the kitchen clock. Only an hour had passed, but the cafe was already humming with activity. The fryers sizzled, the coffee machine hissed, and the chatter of customers filled the air with warmth. Yet amidst all this life and noise, there was a gentle undercurrent of something unspoken, small acts of kindness, fleeting moments of connection, the subtle way human lives intersected without anyone even realizing it. The waitress paused for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the people who depended on this cafe for more than just food. For some, it was a place to escape the loneliness of home, for others, it was a brief connection to a community that always seemed a little out of reach. Emma had grown to understand these unspoken stories, even if she never voiced them. She had learned to read the subtle cues, the slight hesitation before a customer orders, the trembling hands of an older man reaching for a cup of coffee, the fleeting smile that masked fatigue or sorrow. Mr. Thompson looked up from his newspaper and offered a small nod in Emma's direction. She smiled back, a silent acknowledgement that they both understood something about each other without needing words. In that moment, the ordinary day held a quiet magic, the kind of magic that often went unnoticed until someone's life was touched in a way they could never forget. By mid-morning, the cafe was a lively hub of small-town life. Conversations overlapped, laughter rang out from one table, and the scent of fresh pies wafted from the counter. Emma moved seamlessly among the tables, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and offering warm words to anyone who needed them. She was, In many ways, the quiet heartbeat of Sunny's Cafe, the person who kept the rhythm of the town steady without ever expecting recognition. And yet, beneath her calm exterior, Emma carried a deep sense of responsibility, not just for her own family, but for the people who came here, like Mr. Thompson. She had a feeling today would be different, though she didn't know how. Something about the way Mr. Thompson looked at his breakfast, the slight tremor in his hands, the quiet dignity in his posture, it spoke to her. Today, she felt, might be a day where ordinary acts could carry extraordinary weight. The ordinary day in Maplewood had begun as it always did, with sunlight spilling over the streets, the cafe filling with life, and Emma moving gracefully through her world. But sometimes, the simplest mornings held the first seeds of stories that would touch hearts and remind people of what truly mattered: kindness, empathy, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. As the morning unfolded in Sunny's Cafe, the sense of community in Maplewood became more evident. This was not just a restaurant, it was a place where stories intersected, where lives overlapped in small but meaningful ways. Emma knew almost everyone by name, and they knew her, not just as a waitress, but as a reliable, warm presence who made the town feel a little more like home. At one table, Mrs. Caldwell, a retired schoolteacher with silver hair and sparkling eyes, chatted animatedly with the young couple seated next to her. She often came to the cafe not just for the coffee and pancakes, but for the chance to connect, to share stories from decades past. Her laughter was infectious, filling the room and gently nudging even the most solemn of patrons into a lighter mood. Contrast framed perfectly here, her wealth of experience and emotional generosity versus the hurried, self-focused behavior of some other diners who only came for convenience. Meanwhile, behind the counter, Emma's colleague Jake, the short-order cook, was flipping eggs with effortless skill. Jake was in his early 30s, a kind but occasionally gruff man who had lived in Maplewood all his life. He knew the town's gossip before it even reached the customers, yet he always kept the secret codes of community intact. He teased Emma gently as she moved between tables, a mix of camaraderie and silent admiration in his words. Contrast here, Emma's patience and empathy versus Jake's playful, rough-around-the-edges charm. Emma's younger brother, Ryan, often stopped by the cafe on his way to college classes. He had inherited Emma's warm heart, but also her tendency to overthink. Watching Emma balance work, finances, and family responsibilities gave him both awe and quiet concern. Today, as he sipped his usual iced coffee, he noticed her glancing repeatedly at Mr. Thompson and wondered what she might be thinking. The bond between siblings in small-town America was often understated, yet deeply rooted, built on trust, love, and shared struggles. Across the room, a young mother, Claire, sat with her toddler while trying to work on her laptop. Her frustration was visible, the subtle stress of managing work, child care, and life in a town that moved slower than the city she had left behind. Emma, noticing her struggle, offered a kind smile and a small gesture, refilling her coffee without being asked. These small acts of empathy threaded the cafe together, showing how community thrived not on grand gestures, but on quiet attentiveness. Contrast, city stress versus small-town kindness. Even the less prominent characters added texture. There was old Joe, a retired firefighter, who sometimes spoke in hushed tones about the town's history, the changes he had seen, and the people he missed. His storytelling was a quiet bridge between generations, and patrons often listened with rapt attention. And then there were the seasonal workers and travelers who drifted through Maplewood, leaving fleeting imprints on the cafe's atmosphere. Together, they created a patchwork of human experience, a microcosm of life itself. The sense of empathy and interconnectedness was especially visible in Emma's interactions. She remembered the birthdays of regulars, knew who needed encouragement, and who preferred silence. Her attention to detail wasn't just professional, it was personal. Contrast framed beautifully here, Emma's quiet care versus the indifference or self-absorption displayed by some of the transient customers. Even the affluent Mr. Reynolds, who checked his watch every few minutes, could not match the warmth that Emma radiated effortlessly. Outside, Maplewood's small-town rhythm continued. Children dashed to school buses, waving to familiar faces, neighbors stopped to chat briefly by white picket fences, the local bakery delivered fresh bread to the cafe's back door. These external details reinforced the warmth inside Sunny's cafe, making the diner a central hub in the emotional landscape of the town. Every face told a story, every smile or nod carried history, and Emma was at the heart of it all. But it wasn't all sunshine. Small towns carried their own tensions, and Maplewood was no exception. People whispered about each other, old rivalries simmered beneath polite conversation, and some struggles remained invisible until revealed by circumstance. Yet even these contrasts, envy versus generosity, gossip versus discretion, added depth to the community, making every act of kindness, including Emma's later secret gesture, resonate all the more. By mid-morning, the cafe had become a stage where multiple narratives played out simultaneously. Emma moved between tables with practiced grace, balancing orders and listening ears, sensing when someone needed a word of encouragement or a gentle smile. Mr. Thompson quietly ate his breakfast, while Mrs. Caldwell laughed at a joke shared across tables, and Ryan observed his sister's tireless energy with pride and concern. Each character, each interaction, layered the story with meaning, setting up the emotional stakes that would later make Emma's act of generosity so powerful. Through these interconnected lives, the audience could see the town's heartbeat, quiet resilience, unspoken generosity, and the deep human need for connection. In the world of Maplewood, a small gesture could ripple outward in ways no one anticipated. Contrast and tension were subtly embedded, Emma's financial and emotional sacrifices versus the ease of other lives, Mr. Thompson's humble struggle versus Mrs. Caldwell's wealth of experience, the communal warmth versus individual loneliness. And in the middle of it all stood Emma, a young woman whose presence anchored the cafe, whose empathy stitched together lives, and whose quiet strength would soon set the stage for an extraordinary moment. Today, in this small town where every person mattered, the ordinary routines of breakfast, coffee, and conversation carried the seeds of an unforgettable story. Thompson sat quietly at his usual corner table, the newspaper unfolded before him, though he barely looked at the headlines. At 78, he had seen many winters and summers, each leaving its mark on his lined face and slightly stooped shoulders. A widower for over a decade, he had learned to navigate life alone, carrying the weight of memories, solitude, and a modest pension that never seemed enough. Every month, he carefully calculated his expenses, counting each dollar and quarter to make sure he could pay the rent, keep the utilities running, and still afford small comforts, a loaf of bread, a cup of coffee, the occasional dessert at Sunny's cafe. Today, however, the numbers felt heavier, as if they pressed down on him in a way they hadn't before. His fixed income allowed little room for indulgence, and yet his heart longed for the simple pleasure of breakfast at the cafe, a small joy that connected him to the life of the town. As he stirred his coffee, his hand trembled slightly. He tried to shake off the unease, but the quiet self-consciousness of being unable to pay for a meal weighed on him. Contrast, his dignity and pride versus the harsh reality of financial limitation. Mr. Thompson had spent his life helping others, mentoring younger men at the firehouse, volunteering at the community center, offering what little comfort he could to neighbors in need. Now, the roles were reversed, and he felt the uncomfortable sting of dependence, even in a place where everyone knew him. He glanced around the cafe, noticing Emma moving gracefully between tables. There was something in her attentiveness, the way she remembered each customer's preferences, that warmed his heart. He admired her quietly, though he never voiced it aloud. In a way, she reminded him of his late wife, Margaret, the kindness, the attentiveness, the quiet strength. Memories surfaced, breakfasts shared, laughter over spilled coffee, and the comforting routine of small-town life. Now, all of that seemed a little farther away, and yet, seeing Emma offered a glimmer of hope. Contrast was present in every glance around him. Some customers chatted without concern for anything beyond themselves, their lives full of comfort and choice. Others, like him, moved cautiously, aware that every dollar spent had meaning and consequence. The cafe, a place of warmth and connection, also highlighted disparities, the invisible line between independence and reliance, between dignity and necessity. As Mr. Thompson fumbled with his wallet, ensuring he had enough to cover the modest bill, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Pride battled necessity. He wanted to pay, to maintain the independence he had valued for so long, yet the reality of his finances made it impossible. The cashier's glance or a neighbor's observation might have made the act feel humiliating, and he recoiled at the thought. Contrast, pride versus humility, hope versus anxiety. Memories of Margaret softened his tension. He remembered her insistence that kindness and dignity mattered more than money, that the smallest act of generosity could ripple in ways unseen. But the human heart, even after years of wisdom, struggles with the vulnerability of needing help. Mr. Thompson sighed, placing a few coins carefully on the table, enough to cover some of the bill but not all. He hoped Emma wouldn't notice the discrepancy, but he could feel the uncomfortable weight of the moment pressing against his shoulders. Outside the cafe, the town moved on without awareness of his silent struggle. Children laughed on the way to school, dogs barked in the distance, and the delivery truck continued its rounds. Life went on, oblivious to the quiet battles fought at this small corner table. Yet inside Sonny's cafe, the microcosm of human connection made each interaction significant. Contrast, the busy world outside versus the intimate struggles inside, anonymity versus relational awareness. Even as he sipped his coffee, trying to savor the warmth and flavor, Mr. Thompson's mind wandered to his late career and the years of contribution he had given to the town. He had taught swimming lessons, led fundraising for the local firehouse, and always offered guidance to the younger generation. Now, in this modest cafe, he felt the unfamiliar sensation of being on the receiving end of kindness, even if he didn't yet know it. Contrast, giving versus receiving, past contribution versus present vulnerability. Emma, as always, moved past his table with a gentle smile, refilling a cup and adjusting a napkin. Mr. Thompson caught her eye briefly and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude and recognition, though he would never fully express it. His pride, tempered by years of quiet strength, made him hesitant to ask for assistance, but the unspoken understanding in Emma's attentive eyes provided comfort. The morning continued with the usual rhythm, laughter from tables, the hiss of coffee machines, and the occasional murmur of conversation. Yet, for Mr. Thompson, each sound seemed magnified by the awareness of his situation. He felt a quiet anxiety mixed with anticipation, as if the day might hold something unexpected, something that could restore a sense of dignity in a small but meaningful way. He reflected on the lessons life had taught him: humility, patience, and the value of community. Even in moments of struggle, the presence of others, especially those who noticed without judgment, brought a sense of connection that no amount of money could purchase. Contrast, isolation versus community, despair versus hope. As he folded the newspaper and looked out the cafe window, Mr. Thompson noticed a young mother helping her child across the street, a neighbor waving to a passing friend, and Emma's steady movement behind the counter. The world felt simultaneously vast and intimate, filled with challenges but also opportunities for small joys. He leaned back slightly, allowing himself a quiet moment of reflection, unaware that today's ordinary morning might soon turn into an extraordinary story, one that would remind him, and everyone around, of the quiet power of human kindness. By late morning, Sonny's cafe had settled into its familiar rhythm. The smell of fresh bread mingled with coffee, and the hum of conversation created a comforting backdrop. Emma moved between tables with practiced ease, smiling at regulars, checking in with newcomers, and keeping a careful eye on every plate, every order. She noticed Mr. Thompson again, quietly struggling to count his coins at the counter. He looked embarrassed, almost apologetic, as if his presence had become a burden. Emma's heart clenched. She had seen this quiet dignity before, the way some people refused to ask for help, even when they needed it most. Today, she decided, she could make a difference without anyone noticing. Contrast framed itself clearly: Emma's financial modesty versus her overflowing compassion, Mr. Thompson's pride versus the vulnerability of needing help. She moved behind the counter, pretending to check an order slip, while her mind raced with possibilities. Could she cover the meal without causing a scene? Could she preserve his dignity while extending generosity? The answer was clear in her heart, yes. Emma quickly calculated the amount on the bill. It was modest, yet significant for someone like Mr. Thompson. She discreetly slipped her own credit card into the register, quietly covering the difference between what he could pay and the total. Every step was intentional, every movement designed to avoid drawing attention. Contrast, public invisibility versus private heroism. As Mr. Thompson handed over his coins, Emma smiled warmly. "Don't worry about the rest," she said softly, keeping her tone casual, as if it were a normal part of her job. He looked at her, startled, his eyes widening for a brief moment before he shook his head, uncertain how to respond. "Oh, no. I can't," he began, his voice wavering. Emma placed a gentle hand on the counter. "Really, it's okay. Just enjoy your breakfast." Her voice carried no judgment, no pity, only quiet assurance. Contrast, Emma's humility versus societal assumptions about charity, kindness versus embarrassment. Mr. Thompson hesitated, then nodded slowly, still processing what had just happened. He mumbled a quiet, "Thank you," though the depth of gratitude in his eyes said far more than words ever could. The small moment passed quickly, unnoticed by the rest of the cafe, yet for both of them, it carried immense emotional weight. Meanwhile, Emma's colleagues were busy with their own tasks. Jake was flipping pancakes, unaware of the transaction that had just occurred. Mrs. Caldwell laughed across the room, chatting with a couple about a local school fundraiser. The bustling energy of the cafe continued, a stark contrast to the quiet, intimate act of kindness happening behind the counter. Contrast, everyday chaos versus private heroism. As Mr. Thompson returned to his table, he fumbled slightly with his silverware, his hands trembling. He felt a surge of emotions, gratitude, surprise, and a touch of disbelief. Who would do such a thing without wanting recognition? In that moment, he realized that some people carried quiet generosity like a secret treasure, giving without expectation, loving without demands. Emma, meanwhile, continued her work, her heart lightened by the small victory of helping someone in need. She watched from a distance as Mr. Thompson took a cautious sip of coffee, then a tentative bite of his pancakes. A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips, a smile that seemed to brighten the entire cafe. Contrast, simple sustenance versus emotional nourishment. The tension in the moment lingered, though neither Emma nor Mr. Thompson spoke of it further. Small-town dynamics made discretion an art form, and Emma understood that sometimes the most impactful gestures were those that went unseen. Yet, as she moved between tables, her mind replayed the scene repeatedly, aware that this quiet act could ripple outward in ways neither of them anticipated. Across the cafe, the customers were oblivious to the secret unfolding at one corner table. Conversations about local events, school schedules, and weekend plans filled the air. Contrast, ordinary life versus extraordinary moments. Emma felt a quiet pride, a satisfaction that could not be measured in dollars or recognition, only in the warmth that filled her heart and, she hoped, Mr. Thompson's as well. For Mr. Thompson, the act felt like a gentle wind lifting him out of his routine struggles. He remembered times when he had helped others without fanfare, teaching young neighbors to fish, volunteering at the library, or shoveling snow for those who couldn't manage. Now, receiving kindness from someone so young and unassuming reminded him that life still held surprises, that goodness still existed even in a world that often seemed indifferent. Contrast, giving versus receiving, past versus present. Emma, sensing the delicate balance of the moment, continued to engage with other customers, ensuring no one noticed anything unusual. She maintained her cheerful demeanor, laughing with the regulars, offering gentle words of encouragement to the tired mother and playful banter to the children. The ordinary energy of the cafe flowed around the extraordinary act, highlighting the quiet heroism hidden in everyday life. By mid-morning, the transaction was long forgotten by the casual observers, but for Emma and Mr. Thompson, it left a lasting imprint. He finished his meal with a renewed sense of hope, and she moved through the cafe with the knowledge that she had made a meaningful difference without causing embarrassment or drawing attention. Contrast, seen versus unseen impact, humility versus recognition. In the quiet moments between serving tables, Emma reflected on the nature of kindness. She realized that sometimes, the simplest gestures, covering a meal, offering a smile, remembering a favorite dish, could transform someone's day. And perhaps more importantly, they could remind people of their worth, their dignity, and the quiet beauty of human connection. The ordinary morning in Maplewood had now been touched by an extraordinary act. It was subtle, discreet, and almost invisible to anyone else in the cafe. Yet for those involved, the moment carried weight, a promise that even in the midst of financial struggle, loneliness, or pride, compassion could find a way. And as Emma continued her shift, the story quietly began to ripple, setting the stage for the emotional revelations yet to come. By late morning, the cafe had settled into its usual hum, yet an undercurrent of subtle tension lingered, an invisible thread woven between Emma and Mr. Thompson. He had finished his meal, yet instead of leaving immediately, he lingered, adjusting his napkin, pausing as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Emma, meanwhile, kept a casual eye on him, careful not to draw attention, her mind replaying the secret transaction that had just occurred. The first hint of curiosity came from Jake, the cook, who noticed Emma's slightly distracted demeanor. "You're smiling a little too much at that old man," he teased, flipping a pancake with a flourish. "What's going on?" His tone was light, but curiosity in small towns was always a sharper edge than humor. Emma laughed, brushing it off. "Just doing my job, Jake." Yet, the small smile tugged at the corners of her lips, betraying the satisfaction she felt from her private act of kindness. Contrast, playful banter versus hidden generosity. Mr. Thompson, feeling a mixture of gratitude and unease, tried to slip out unnoticed. But small-town dynamics rarely allowed for such quiet exits. The few patrons at nearby tables glanced in his direction, sensing something different in the air. His slight hesitation, the way he fumbled with his coat, even the subtle lift of his eyebrows, it all sparked speculation, a curiosity that was impossible to ignore. Contrast, ordinary routines versus unusual behavior. Across the cafe, Mrs. Caldwell noticed the unusual tension. She leaned toward the young couple she was chatting with, whispering, "Something's happening with Mr. Thompson. I don't know what, but look at his face." Her voice carried no judgment, only fascination. Small-town townspeople had a natural curiosity, a need to connect dots even when they weren't fully aware of the story. Emma's discreet act was already creating ripples, though no one yet understood why. Emma continued to move between tables, delivering coffee, refilling water, and keeping the rhythm of the cafe steady. Inside, however, she felt a tension building, a delicate awareness that her secret might be discovered, even inadvertently. She had acted out of kindness, but in a town like Maplewood, where everyone observed one another, curiosity could turn any act into a public spectacle. Contrast, private generosity versus public speculation. Mr. Thompson tried to calm himself, focusing on the newspaper in front of him, but the subtle glances from other patrons made it difficult. He sensed that something had changed, perhaps in Emma, perhaps in himself. His pride urged him to leave quietly, yet a part of him wanted to understand what had just happened. This inner conflict added to the suspense, pulling the audience deeper into his emotional experience. A young family near the window whispered among themselves, exchanging curious looks. "Did you see the way he looked at the waitress?" one child's parent asked softly. The child glanced up, sensing excitement without fully understanding it. Such micro-interactions amplified the intrigue, showing how even unnoticed actions could ripple through a community. Contrast, innocence versus perception, secrecy versus discovery. Emma, sensing the subtle shift in the cafe's atmosphere, maintained her composure. She greeted customers with her usual warmth, all while quietly observing Mr. Thompson. Each small gesture, the tilt of his head, the quick glance around the room, the slightly nervous sip of coffee, added to the suspense. She knew that revealing the act too soon would disrupt the delicate balance, yet the weight of expectation pressed lightly on her conscience. Jake, noticing the tension too, exchanged a knowing glance with Emma. "Something's up," he muttered under his breath. Emma only smiled faintly, shaking her head. She had intentionally kept the act private, and the suspense only highlighted the contrast between the ordinary flow of the cafe and the extraordinary secret she carried. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson's gratitude grew heavier in his chest. He wanted to express thanks but felt constrained by pride. Each glance from Emma was a reminder of her kindness, but also a prompt to maintain dignity. Contrast, humility versus gratitude, emotional restraint versus inner warmth. As the morning progressed, the subtle whispers and glances became more noticeable. Patrons began to exchange conjectures, some joking, some genuinely puzzled. Emma remained the calm center of the storm, moving seamlessly among tables, ensuring that the cafe's rhythm continued uninterrupted. Yet, beneath the surface, curiosity was building, a quiet tension that promised eventual revelation. By mid-morning, the small acts and hidden glances had woven a tapestry of suspense across the cafe. Emma's secret generosity, the old man's quiet gratitude, and the subtle observations of staff and patrons combined to create an atmosphere rich with anticipation. Every moment, every pause, every smile or glance carried emotional weight, preparing the audience for the moment when the truth would finally emerge. Contrast, ordinary morning versus extraordinary story waiting to unfold. The stage was now set. Suspicion and curiosity had quietly taken root, threading through every interaction. Emma's kindness, Mr. Thompson's vulnerability, and the cafe's attentive patrons created a living, breathing suspense that mirrored the emotional depth of real life. And in the quiet, unnoticed corners of Maplewood, the anticipation lingered, hinting at the ripple of reactions that would soon follow when a simple act of generosity became the catalyst for an unforgettable moment in the heart of the community. By late morning, the quiet tension in Sunny's cafe had begun to shift. Small-town life had a way of noticing the slightest deviations from routine, and today was no exception. What started as subtle glances and quiet curiosity quickly transformed into whispered conjectures. Mrs. Caldwell, ever attentive, had shared her observations with the young couple she was chatting with, her voice carrying just enough intrigue to spark interest without being overt. "Did you see the way Mr. Thompson looked at Emma?" she whispered. "I'm telling you, something unusual happened." The couple exchanged curious glances, leaning in to catch the slightest gesture Emma made. In a town like Maplewood, where everyone's life intertwined, even a small, discreet action could become a story within hours. Contrast, private act versus public speculation, anonymity versus scrutiny. Jake, the cook, noticed the subtle shift in conversation and raised an eyebrow. "People are talking," he muttered, wiping his hands on a towel. Emma, moving past the counter with a tray of freshly poured coffee, shot him a quick smile. She had anticipated that curiosity might spiral, but she hadn't expected it to accelerate so quickly. Her heart fluttered, not from fear, but from the knowledge that her small act of kindness was about to touch more lives than she had imagined. By midday, rumors had spread beyond the cafe. Customers returning to work or running errands whispered about the unusual scene involving Mr. Thompson and Emma. Some speculated about a payment, others about a family connection, while a few indulged in the classic small-town love story tropes. Every version added a new layer of intrigue, though none fully captured the truth. Contrast, imagination versus reality, gossip versus fact. Inside the cafe, Mr. Thompson remained quiet, trying to enjoy a second cup of coffee, but he could feel the subtle awareness of others. Patrons' eyes flicked toward him, curiosity evident in their expressions. He felt a mix of embarrassment and warmth, embarrassment at being the center of attention, warmth from the realization that his quiet moment of gratitude had resonated with the community. Contrast, humility versus communal observation, privacy versus exposure. Emma noticed the murmurs as she moved between tables. She maintained her professional demeanor, smiling, refilling drinks, and ensuring each customer felt seen. Yet inside, she felt the ripple of emotions, pride in her act, anxiety about how it would be interpreted, and hope that the story would emphasize the values of kindness rather than creating judgment. Small-town dynamics were delicate, the line between admiration and criticism was thin. Meanwhile, social media quietly played its part. A teenager in the cafe snapped a picture of Mr. Thompson and Emma, posting it with a vague caption about a heartwarming moment. Within minutes, the image began to circulate, spreading curiosity beyond Maplewood's borders. Contrast, intimate, private gesture versus public dissemination, traditional small-town life versus modern digital reach. Staff at the cafe, including Jake, exchanged knowing glances. "Looks like our secret is out," he said with a grin. Emma shook her head lightly, though a small smile tugged at her lips. The irony was not lost on her. The very discretion that had preserved Mr. Thompson's dignity was now giving way to communal fascination. The cafe buzzed with a mixture of genuine admiration and playful speculation. Mrs. Caldwell leaned closer to the couple at her table, whispering details of her own conjectures. "I've never seen Mr. Thompson so surprised," she said softly, nodding toward the corner table. "And Emma, well, she has a way of doing good quietly." Contrast, observation versus action, speculation versus reality. As more customers noticed, the atmosphere shifted from casual morning chatter to an almost festive energy. Conversations now included fragments of the story, Emma's kindness, Mr. Thompson's quiet gratitude, and the mystery surrounding the event. Everyone wanted to know more, though no one had the full picture yet. The suspense built naturally, threading through each interaction and deepening the emotional resonance of the moment. For Mr. Thompson, the attention was uncomfortable yet heartening. He appreciated the recognition of an act he had only privately valued. He glanced at Emma, who met his eyes with a subtle, reassuring nod. In that glance, they both acknowledged the delicate balance between public attention and private meaning. Contrast, exposure versus dignity, curiosity versus gratitude. By mid-afternoon, the cafe had become a stage for small-town storytelling. Rumors, conjectures, and whispered praise wove a tapestry of communal engagement. The simple act of paying a meal had transformed into a story of human kindness that resonated with the town's values of empathy, respect, and connectedness. Contrast, ordinary breakfast versus extraordinary impact, private generosity versus shared inspiration. Emma, now aware that her secret was no longer entirely hidden, continued her work with grace. She greeted each customer warmly, offered words of encouragement, and moved with the same practiced efficiency, even as her mind replayed the morning's events. The subtle tension had not diminished her focus, but it added a layer of emotional depth, showing how small acts of kindness could ripple far beyond their immediate context. And so, in the small town of Maplewood, what began as a discreet gesture of compassion had grown into a story circulating through whispers, glances, and shared speculation. The cafe, the heart of the community, had become a vessel for human connection, highlighting the profound impact of simple generosity. The rumors spread, but within them, the moral of the story, the quiet power of kindness, was already taking root. By mid-afternoon, the cafe had grown quieter, the morning rush replaced by the gentle hum of a few lingering patrons. Mr. Thompson sat at his usual corner table, staring into the remaining cup of coffee before him. The morning's events, Emma's secret act of kindness and the subtle wave of curiosity that followed, still lingered in his mind. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, he felt a sense of warmth that had little to do with the sunlight streaming through the window. He reflected on the ordinary days that had passed, quiet mornings spent alone, modest meals prepared at home, and the steady rhythm of small-town life that had, for all its familiarity, grown predictable and sometimes lonely. Today, however, was different. The small act of generosity had touched him in ways words could barely capture. Contrast, past isolation versus present connection, routine versus unexpected joy. Mr. Thompson's thoughts turned to his late wife, Margaret. He remembered her insistence that the smallest gestures of kindness carried enormous weight, that generosity given quietly could ripple unseen, transforming lives subtly but profoundly. He could almost hear her gentle voice, reminding him that dignity and empathy were intertwined. The memory added depth to his gratitude, making it not just about receiving help, but about being reminded of humanity's enduring goodness. He wanted to express his thanks, but his pride and natural reserve made words difficult. Saying, "thank you," seemed inadequate for the enormity of the kindness he had received. Contrast, humble expression versus immense emotional impact. His hands, slightly trembling, folded over the empty cup as he tried to gather the courage to speak directly to Emma. Meanwhile, Emma continued her shift, moving between tables with her usual grace, unaware that Mr. Thompson was contemplating how to articulate the depth of his gratitude. She was busy serving a family at the window, laughing at a child's joke, and offering gentle encouragement to a tired mother trying to balance work and parenting. Contrast, Emma's outward energy versus Mr. Thompson's inward reflection. Finally, after several quiet minutes, Mr. Thompson rose from his chair. He moved toward the counter slowly, carefully, as if each step carried the weight of his emotion. Emma looked up, smiling warmly, and he cleared his throat, his voice soft but firm. "Emma. I just wanted to, thank you." The words were simple, yet the sincerity behind them was unmistakable. His eyes glistened, hinting at the depth of feeling he struggled to put into words. Emma paused, her hands resting briefly on the counter, and nodded gently. "You don't have to thank me," she replied, her voice calm and reassuring. "I just wanted you to enjoy your breakfast." Contrast, verbal restraint versus emotional honesty, simplicity versus significance. Mr. Thompson smiled faintly, a mixture of humility and relief washing over him. "It's more than just breakfast," he said softly. "It's everything it represents. Your kindness, your understanding, it reminds me that there's still good in the world." His gaze shifted toward the window, reflecting on the town, the cafe, and the community he had known for decades. Contrast, material act versus emotional impact, ordinary gesture versus life-affirming lesson. Emma listened quietly, touched by the depth of his words. She knew she had acted out of simple empathy, yet hearing him articulate the effect it had on his spirit added an unexpected emotional resonance. The moral lesson, kindness could transform not only a moment but a heart, was now vividly alive between them. Other patrons, noticing the quiet exchange, felt the subtle weight of the moment. Mrs. Caldwell leaned slightly toward the young couple she had been chatting with earlier, whispering softly, "Look, that's real gratitude." The air in the cafe seemed to pause, everyone attuned to the human connection unfolding. Contrast, everyday background noise versus emotionally charged moment, observer versus participant. Mr. Thompson, emboldened by the genuine acknowledgement, continued. "You don't know what this means to me. I've lived a long life, and most days go by quietly, unnoticed. Today felt different. Today felt hopeful." His voice quivered slightly, betraying the layers of feeling he had long suppressed. Emma, moved by his honesty, offered a small smile. "I just wanted you to have a good morning. That's all that matters." Her humility amplified the impact, showing that acts of kindness often needed no recognition to be powerful. Contrast, public applause versus private fulfillment, external acknowledgement versus intrinsic reward. Mr. Thompson nodded, taking a step back as if to give space to both of them. He glanced around the cafe, noticing the subtle attentiveness of other patrons who had witnessed the moment. In small-town America, such quiet emotional exchanges often resonated beyond the immediate participants, reminding everyone present of the simple but profound values of empathy, community, and dignity. His thoughts returned to the broader implications of the morning. He had been reminded that even in the most ordinary routines, extraordinary moments could emerge, moments that connected generations, bridged social gaps, and highlighted the enduring power of human kindness. Contrast, routine life versus transformative moments, small gestures versus lasting impact. Emma, observing the lingering effect on Mr. Thompson, felt a quiet satisfaction. The act had been small, almost invisible to the world, yet its emotional resonance was undeniable. It was a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful acts did not require fanfare or recognition, only awareness, empathy, and courage to act. For Mr. Thompson, the gratitude was more than words, it was a renewed sense of hope and belonging. The cafe, the town, and the people within it, especially Emma, reminded him that life, even in its quieter moments, held beauty, generosity, and connection. Contrast, solitude versus community, despair versus hope, ordinary life versus emotional revelation. As the afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting warm light across the tables, Mr. Thompson finally felt a sense of completion. The gratitude he carried was not merely for the meal, but for the affirmation of human goodness, for the recognition of his dignity, and for the reminder that small-town communities still valued compassion and respect. Emma returned to the counter, wiping a glass with a clean cloth, unaware that her actions had deeply impacted someone she admired. The moral lesson of the day, simple, quiet generosity, was now alive in both their hearts. And for everyone in Sonny's cafe who had observed even a fragment of the exchange, it offered a gentle but powerful reminder: the smallest acts could transform ordinary mornings into moments of extraordinary humanity. By late afternoon, the cafe had regained a sense of normalcy after the morning's subtle suspense. Patrons sipped coffee and nibbled pastries, chatting quietly about weekend plans and local news. Yet an invisible tension lingered. Small-town curiosity had begun to accumulate, preparing the stage for a moment that would soon resonate deeply across Maplewood. Emma moved gracefully between tables, checking in with customers and keeping her composure. She had managed to keep her act of kindness a secret, but she sensed that the ripple of curiosity was nearing a tipping point. Mr. Thompson sat quietly at his corner table, his demeanor calm but his heart pounding with a mix of gratitude and nervous anticipation. The secret they shared, the generosity that had brightened his morning, hung between them like an invisible thread, waiting for acknowledgement. The first hint that the moment was about to arrive came from Jake. "Emma, I think they're starting to talk," he whispered, nodding toward a cluster of patrons who were leaning in subtly, exchanging glances, and murmuring quietly. Emma nodded slightly, aware that the time for quiet discretion was drawing to a close. The contrast between private acts and public recognition was about to unfold. Mr. Thompson, sensing the mounting curiosity, felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Pride urged him to remain silent, to preserve his dignity, yet the warm bond he felt with Emma encouraged him to speak. He looked around the cafe, noting familiar faces, neighbors, friends, and strangers alike, each observing the subtle tension in the air. Contrast, dignity versus acknowledgement, humility versus revelation. Finally, unable to contain his gratitude any longer, Mr. Thompson rose slowly from his seat. His movements were deliberate, measured, each step reflecting the careful balance between modesty and the desire to express thanks. He cleared his throat softly, capturing the attention of nearby patrons. "Excuse me," he began, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable warmth, "I have something important to share." The cafe fell into a gentle hush. Even children paused mid-bite, sensing the seriousness of the moment. Emma looked up from the counter, her heart quickening, while Jake leaned casually on the counter, a subtle grin spreading across his face. Contrast, ordinary cafe noise versus attentive silence, background chatter versus focused attention. Mr. Thompson turned to face Emma directly. "This morning, Emma did something extraordinary for me," he said, his voice carrying both sincerity and emotion. "Without asking, without making a scene, she paid for my breakfast. She gave me a gift that was small in amount but immense in meaning. It reminded me that kindness still exists, that people care, and that dignity can be preserved even when we need help." A murmur spread through the cafe, growing steadily as the words sank in. Patrons glanced at one another, some smiling, some wiping the corner of their eyes, all touched by the depth of the story. Contrast, quiet generosity versus public admiration, subtle action versus powerful recognition. Emma felt a mixture of embarrassment and quiet joy. She had not acted for attention, yet seeing the emotional impact unfold in real time was profoundly moving. The cafe, once a background of ordinary activity, had transformed into a stage for human connection and moral revelation. Contrast, private gesture versus communal celebration, modesty versus appreciation. Mrs. Caldwell, ever perceptive, clapped lightly at the sentiment, soon joined by other patrons. The sound was gentle at first, then louder, a spontaneous wave of acknowledgement for Emma's selfless act. The clapping, simple and heartfelt, resonated throughout the cafe, turning an ordinary afternoon into a moment of shared humanity. Contrast, silence versus applause, ordinary cafe atmosphere versus emotional crescendo. Children looked up in wide-eyed amazement, mimicking the adults' clapping, their laughter blending with the warmth in the room. Even patrons who had been skeptical or distracted found themselves caught in the energy of the moment. In Maplewood, where community values and human kindness were held dear, the acknowledgement felt natural, deeply satisfying, and emotionally rich. Mr. Thompson returned to his seat, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The clapping, though unexpected, reassured him that his gratitude was shared, that Emma's kindness was recognized not as charity, but as a genuine act of human compassion. Contrast, private satisfaction versus shared joy, humility versus communal celebration. Emma, smiling softly, nodded to Mr. Thompson, her eyes conveying both reassurance and warmth. "I just wanted you to enjoy your morning," she said, her voice calm yet filled with emotion. The simplicity of her words amplified their significance, reminding everyone present that true generosity often required no grand gestures, only awareness, empathy, and courage to act. The story of the morning quickly became a centerpiece of conversation. Patrons shared their interpretations, emphasizing different aspects: the courage to act, the preservation of dignity, the reminder of human goodness. Each retelling added depth, reinforcing the moral lesson while celebrating the power of small but meaningful actions. Contrast, individual experience versus communal reflection, ordinary event versus extraordinary impact. Jake, leaning against the counter with a proud grin, whispered to Emma, "See? Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference." She nodded, quietly moved, reflecting on how an ordinary act in a small-town cafe had blossomed into a moment of inspiration. Even after the clapping subsided, the atmosphere of the cafe had changed. Patrons spoke in softer tones, more attentive, more empathetic. The ripple of Emma's kindness extended beyond the immediate act, touching hearts and reminding everyone of the quiet, enduring power of compassion. Contrast, normal cafe life versus emotionally transformed environment, casual morning versus unforgettable story. By the time the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tables, Sunny's Cafe had become more than just a place for meals. It was a symbol of the community's values, a testament to the profound effect of selfless actions, and a living example of how ordinary people could make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. And in that moment, as the town absorbed the story, both Emma and Mr. Thompson understood something essential: that human kindness, when genuine and discreet, could spark an emotional ripple capable of transforming not just individual lives, but an entire community. By late afternoon, the atmosphere in Sunny's Cafe had transformed completely. What had begun as a quiet act of kindness had blossomed into a full celebration of generosity, community values, and heartfelt connection. Patrons who had been quietly observing Emma and Mr. Thompson now openly expressed their admiration, clapping, smiling, and sharing gentle congratulations. The cafe, a place once filled with ordinary chatter and routine breakfasts, now radiated warmth, joy, and communal pride. Mrs. Caldwell led the informal applause, her voice ringing clear, encouraging others to join. "Let's show Emma how much we appreciate her," she exclaimed. One by one, customers followed, creating a wave of recognition that filled every corner of the cafe. Children clapped their small hands, imitating the adults and adding an innocent exuberance to the moment. Contrast, ordinary mourning versus extraordinary celebration, quiet generosity versus public acknowledgement. Emma, initially embarrassed, smiled warmly, her cheeks flushed with the combined effect of surprise and joy. She had acted without expectation, yet the outpouring of appreciation was deeply moving. For a moment, she paused behind the counter, absorbing the collective gratitude that had enveloped her. The moral clarity of the situation, kindness without anticipation of reward, was now reflected in the heartfelt reactions of the community. Mr. Thompson, seated at his usual corner table, felt a profound sense of connection. The clapping and smiles were not just for him, but for Emma's spirit, and in that, he felt part of something larger than himself. Contrast, private benefit versus public celebration, individual gratitude versus communal joy. Word spread quickly, as is often the case in small towns like Maplewood. Neighbors who had not been present in the cafe arrived, eager to witness the story firsthand. Some had heard whispers, others had seen the subtle exchanges from the morning. All were drawn by the shared human desire to honor goodness and recognize the quiet heroes among them. Contrast, ordinary cafe patrons versus the broader town community, private acts versus collective experience. The cafe staff, including Jake and several younger employees, joined in the celebration, laughing and clapping alongside the customers. Even routine work, refilling cups, clearing tables, was infused with new energy, as if the simple act of communal acknowledgement had elevated every task. Emma continued to serve, her movements now buoyed by the collective spirit of appreciation that surrounded her. Stories began to circulate spontaneously among the patrons, each retelling adding layers to the narrative. Some emphasized Emma's humility, others highlighted Mr. Thompson's quiet dignity. A few even commented on how this simple gesture had reminded them of similar acts in their own lives, prompting a chain reaction of gratitude and reflection. Contrast, individual observation versus shared storytelling, ordinary day versus extraordinary moral lesson. Parents shared the moment with their children, pointing out the significance of giving without expectation. "See, honey," one mother said softly, "this is how kindness works. It doesn't have to be big, it just has to come from the heart." The lesson, quietly imparted through lived example, resonated as much with the young as it did with the adults. Contrast, casual observation versus intentional moral teaching, simplicity versus meaningfulness. Mr. Thompson, moved by the collective celebration, rose once more, this time to join in the communal acknowledgement. "Thank you all," he said, his voice steady, though rich with emotion. "Not just for Emma, but for reminding me, and all of us, that our small town is full of kindness, care, and generosity. This is what makes Maplewood special." The applause swelled again, affirming the community's shared values and the recognition of both the giver and the receiver of kindness. Emma, now visibly emotional, walked to Mr. Thompson's table, offering a gentle smile. "It's been my pleasure," she said simply. The simplicity of her words, paired with the grandeur of communal celebration, amplified the emotional resonance. Contrast, humble speech versus profound impact, private action versus public honor. The cafe, usually a routine backdrop to daily life, had transformed into a space of connection, reflection, and celebration. Every table, every chair, every familiar face contributed to the feeling that something extraordinary had taken place, not because of wealth, status, or spectacle, but because of genuine human empathy and care. Even those who had arrived late sensed the energy. Conversations hushed as newcomers witnessed the story unfolding in real time. The ripple effect extended beyond the cafe walls. Soon, people walking along the nearby streets paused, exchanging glances, nodding, and sharing soft smiles. Contrast, contained celebration versus community-wide recognition, localized event versus broader societal reflection. By the end of the afternoon, the moral lesson had crystallized. Generosity, humility, and empathy were celebrated not just in word but in deed. Sunny's Cafe had become a microcosm of what a compassionate, attentive, and caring community could look like. The celebration was not about individual recognition alone, but about the affirmation of shared values, the reinforcement of dignity, and the joy of witnessing authentic human connection. Emma returned to her duties with a sense of fulfillment that transcended monetary reward or public acknowledgement. The applause, smiles, and whispered thanks were merely echoes of a deeper truth, that small acts of kindness could resonate far beyond the moment they were performed, creating waves of emotional warmth, inspiration, and community cohesion. Mr. Thompson lingered a little longer than usual, savoring both the meal and the celebration. In the quiet moments between claps and laughter, he reflected on the extraordinary day, the humble breakfast that had become a symbol of human goodness, the quiet strength of Emma's character, and the unspoken connections that tied the town together. Contrast, ordinary breakfast versus extraordinary communal uplift, subtle generosity versus public affirmation. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting a golden glow across Maplewood, the cafe returned to a gentle hum. Yet the energy of the celebration lingered in the hearts of all present. Conversations now included reflections on kindness, stories of past generosity, and hopes for future acts of compassion. The moral lesson had been shared, absorbed, and cherished. In the end, Sonny's Cafe stood not just as a place to eat, but as a testament to the enduring power of human empathy, the beauty of giving without expectation, and the way a single act of kindness could inspire a community to celebrate the very best of its values. By early evening, Sonny's Cafe had settled back into a quiet rhythm, the buzz of celebration gradually softening to a calm, reflective atmosphere. Emma wiped down the counter, her thoughts drifting over the events of the day. What had started as a simple decision, to quietly pay for Mr. Thompson's meal, had blossomed into something far greater than she could have imagined. Contrast, ordinary chores versus extraordinary emotional resonance. She paused for a moment, looking out the window at Maplewood's familiar streets. Children rode bikes, neighbors exchanged greetings, and the golden sunset cast warm light across the town. In the stillness, Emma felt a profound sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about recognition, applause, or validation, it was about the ripple of goodness she had helped set in motion. Every glance, every smile, every whispered thank you had been a testament to the quiet power of kindness. Mr. Thompson, sitting at his usual corner table with his cup of coffee now empty, reflected on the morning's events. His heart was full of gratitude, not just for Emma's generosity, but for the reminder that even in challenging times, human compassion endured. He thought about the struggles of his own life, the moments of loneliness, the small setbacks, the quiet pride that sometimes kept him from asking for help, and realized that this single act of kindness had reaffirmed his faith in community and human decency. Contrast, past hardship versus renewed hope, private struggle versus shared human connection. Emma's thoughts turned to the broader lessons embedded in the day's events. She understood that kindness did not always have to be grand or public to make a difference. Sometimes, the smallest gestures, paying for a meal, offering a gentle word, or simply being present, could transform someone's day, their outlook, and even their sense of belonging. Contrast, simplicity versus profound impact, unnoticed action versus lasting effect. She glanced at Mr. Thompson, who gave her a quiet nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged between them. That simple gesture carried more meaning than words ever could. For Emma, it was a reminder that life's most important connections often arose from acts of empathy, courage, and attentiveness to the needs of others. Contrast, spoken gratitude versus unspoken understanding, fleeting interaction versus enduring connection. Across the cafe, patrons were quietly reflecting as well. The claps, the smiles, the gentle conversations had created an atmosphere of collective introspection. Many considered their own potential to contribute kindness to the world, inspired by the tangible example of Emma's generosity. The ripple effect extended beyond the immediate participants, subtly shaping the moral fabric of the community. Contrast, individual action versus community-wide inspiration, personal fulfillment versus shared moral awakening. Mr. Thompson finally spoke softly, almost to himself, it's amazing how a small act can remind us of what truly matters." His words were simple, yet profound, capturing the essence of the day. Emma, hearing this, felt a deep resonance, knowing that the moral of her quiet gesture had been fully realized. Contrast: ordinary words versus extraordinary meaning, mundane moment versus life lesson. As the sun dipped lower, the golden light reflecting on the cafe's wooden floors, Emma reflected on her own life. She realized that acts of kindness were not only about helping others, they also shaped the giver, nurturing empathy, humility, and a sense of purpose. By reaching out to Mr. Thompson, she had not only brightened his day, she had enriched her own life, discovering the profound satisfaction that comes from selfless action. Contrast: giving versus personal growth, outward generosity versus inward fulfillment. Mr. Thompson looked around the cafe, noting the smiles and subtle glances of patrons still lingering. He thought about his own ability to respond to kindness in the future, inspired to pay it forward whenever possible. He felt a renewed commitment to being attentive, empathetic, and generous in his interactions, understanding that even small gestures could create lasting change. Contrast: received kindness versus inspired action, contemplation versus application. Emma wiped her hands on her apron, taking a deep breath, savoring the calm after the day's emotional intensity. She understood that this was more than just a story of paying for a meal, it was a lesson in human connection, in noticing when someone needs help, in acting courageously even when no one is watching, and in allowing kindness to flourish quietly yet powerfully. Contrast: ordinary cafe work versus extraordinary moral insight, action versus reflection. As the evening progressed, the cafe slowly emptied, leaving only Emma, Mr. Thompson, and a few lingering patrons. The quiet allowed the weight of the day's lessons to settle in fully. Conversations softened, smiles lingered, and a deep sense of contentment filled the air. Everyone present carried with them a renewed understanding of the importance of empathy, generosity, and the simple yet profound ways humans could touch each other's lives. Finally, Emma locked up the cafe for the night, stepping outside into the cool Maplewood air. She looked back at the building, reflecting on the ordinary space that had witnessed extraordinary human connection. She understood that moments like these, small, quiet, and authentic, were what made life meaningful. And as she walked home, she carried with her the knowledge that even one person's simple choice to act with kindness could ripple outward, touching hearts in ways unseen but deeply felt. Contrast: everyday closure versus enduring impact, private reflection versus universal lesson. For Mr. Thompson, the day remained a beacon of hope. He would return home, share the story with friends and family, and carry with him a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that acts of kindness were not fleeting, they were seeds planted, capable of growing into something larger, something transformative, and something deeply human. As night fell over Maplewood, the moral of the day lingered like a gentle whisper: compassion matters, generosity counts, and even the smallest act, performed with a pure heart, could illuminate lives in ways immeasurable. Both Emma and Mr. Thompson, and everyone who had witnessed the story, would carry the lesson forward, a quiet affirmation of the enduring power of human kindness. As evening deepened into night, Maplewood glowed with the soft light of street lamps and the quiet hum of a town settling down after a day full of small yet profound moments. The story of Emma's act of kindness and Mr. Thompson's heartfelt gratitude had spread far beyond the walls of Sunny's cafe. What had begun as a private gesture had transformed into a shared experience, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. Contrast: ordinary town night versus extraordinary emotional resonance. Emma closed the cafe doors for the night, the quiet click echoing in the empty space. Her thoughts lingered on the ripple effect of the morning. She realized that even small acts could create a wave of positivity far beyond the initial moment. From the whispered conversations to the warm smiles of strangers, kindness had taken on a life of its own, radiating through the community in ways she could never have anticipated. Contrast: simple closure versus lasting influence, personal act versus communal effect. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson walked home slowly, savoring the cool evening air. Each step was lighter than it had been in months, as if the warmth of gratitude and recognition had lifted a weight he hadn't fully realized he carried. He reflected on the way small gestures could not only restore faith in humanity but also inspire others to act with empathy and care. Contrast: past isolation versus renewed community connection, ordinary walk versus reflective journey. The townspeople of Maplewood carried the story forward in their own ways. Parents shared it with children as an example of humility and empathy. Neighbors spoke of it in grocery stores and post offices, emphasizing the transformative power of simple generosity. Even local social media channels buzzed quietly with reflections, images, and gentle praise. Contrast: private experience versus communal storytelling, small gesture versus broad moral influence. Jake, the cook, cleaned the kitchen with a contented smile, replaying the morning's events in his mind. "Sometimes the little things matter most," he murmured. The staff felt a renewed sense of purpose in their daily tasks, understanding that their work environment could become a stage for human connection and moral reflection. Contrast: routine work versus emotional significance, small contribution versus meaningful impact. Emma, sitting at her kitchen table later that night, reflected on the day with quiet satisfaction. She thought about Mr. Thompson, the patrons, and the ripple of warmth that had spread throughout the cafe and town. She understood that true kindness did not seek recognition, yet the joy it inspired was contagious. The lesson was clear: empathy and generosity, however subtle, had the power to change lives. Contrast: private reflection versus public outcome, unnoticed action versus deep influence. Mr. Thompson, settled at home with a cup of tea, wrote a letter to Emma the next morning, expressing his gratitude in words that had eluded him in person. He described how her act had rekindled hope, inspired connection, and reminded him of the enduring goodness of the human spirit. The letter, heartfelt and genuine, was a tangible testament to the lasting impact of her kindness. Contrast: spoken gratitude versus written acknowledgement, fleeting moment versus enduring memory. Over the following weeks, Maplewood continued to feel the reverberations of that single morning. Acts of kindness, both big and small, became more frequent as people were inspired by Emma's example. Whether it was holding a door, offering a helping hand, or simply smiling at a neighbor, the town experienced a subtle cultural shift, a quiet celebration of empathy that elevated everyday interactions. Contrast: ordinary life versus enriched community spirit, individual action versus collective inspiration. Emma and Mr. Thompson's story became a gentle legend within the town, a reminder that the human heart was capable of immense generosity, even in ordinary circumstances. Visitors to Sonny's Cafe often asked about the incident, and Emma would recount it with humility, emphasizing that the real lesson was not her action alone but the way kindness connected people, inspired reflection, and strengthened community bonds. Contrast: personal story versus universal moral lesson, local act versus timeless principle. As the town reflected on these events, the emotional resonance extended beyond the immediate moment. Families, neighbors, and friends recognized the importance of attentiveness to the needs of others, the courage to act with empathy, and the joy of giving without expectation. Maplewood had quietly learned a lesson in human dignity, humility, and interconnectedness, a moral that would endure far longer than the morning coffee that had sparked it. Contrast: temporary event versus lasting moral, ordinary interaction versus profound life lesson. Finally, Emma, looking out over the quiet streets of Maplewood, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The claps, the smiles, the whispered stories, all of it reinforced a timeless truth, that even the smallest acts of kindness, performed with a pure heart, could create a legacy of empathy, connection, and hope. In her mind, the moral was simple yet profound: humanity thrives when compassion and generosity guide our actions. Mr. Thompson, reflecting on the day, felt a renewed commitment to his own acts of kindness. He understood that gratitude alone was insufficient unless paired with action, paying forward the warmth he had received. The morning at Sonny's Cafe had not only restored hope but had planted seeds of enduring goodness, capable of flourishing across the community for years to come. Contrast: received kindness versus inspired generosity, momentary experience versus lifelong principle. As night settled over Maplewood, the cafe's lights dimmed, but the story of Emma and Mr. Thompson shone brightly in the hearts of all who had witnessed it. The town had been reminded that true generosity required no audience, yet when acknowledged, it could uplift, inspire, and create a ripple of humanity that extended far beyond its origin. And in this quiet, heartfelt way, the lesson endured: kindness, humility, and empathy were not only values to aspire to but actions capable of transforming lives and communities alike.